In 1642, this beautiful plain in Warwickshire played host to bloody carnage. Pike and pistol, sword, musket and cannon all resounded as nearly 30,000 Roundheads and Cavaliers fought the first battle of the English Civil War. No archaeological work has ever been done into this famous battle that began the ferocious war between King Charles I and his Parliament. Until now.
Well, that'll do about there. The Battle of Edgehill marks the start of the English Civil War. It's a story of courage and cowardice, of mistakes and missed opportunities.
And this is Edgehill, the 5-kilometre-long ridge of high ground that the battle is named after. And it was up here that Charles I and his army took their positions. Down there on the level plain below them was the parliamentarian force under the command of the Earl of Essex. They were implacable foes, but at the same time, they were all fellow countrymen. And on that day, they had a choice, either to step back from the brink or over and into the precipice, into a war that would rip the country apart. Where does the term cavalier come from?
I think originally it came from caballero, Spanish for a horse soldier, so it meant sort of swaggering bully. But also, because Spain was a Catholic country, at the time it'd have despotic connotations. And I suppose today it does still have a negative edge if somebody's cavalier with something, uncaring. And
Well, like Roundhead, that's gone, except in history books. You'd never call somebody a Roundhead.
No. You get skinheads now, because that's what it is, isn't it? It's just a description of the haircut that Puritans used to have.
My mother, for reasons best known to herself, used to cut my fringe around, taking the line of my eyebrows, so that I had this kind of double arch thing going and a little premature widow's peak. Yeah, it's great. Anytime she get me to sit still for long enough. Nearly 350 years ago, King Charles's army used horses and pulleys to slowly lower their cannons down the slope of Edgehill to the village of Radway at the bottom. The bustle and roar as 14,000 soldiers and all the hardware of war descended on the village must have been incredible.
Oh, look, Harry. Oh, wow. We brought our archaeological team to Edgehill to investigate 3 aspects of the battle: the famous cavalry charge, the battle itself, and Old St. Peter's Church. We were rendezvousing with the troops at the village duck pond, eager to launch the second invasion of Radway.
Old St. Peter's was Radway's parish church in 1642. The Royalist troops marched past it on their way to fight. It was an important part of the 17th century battle landscape, but has long since disappeared. Our first mission was to rediscover its whereabouts. But would the locals offer any resistance?
We know that this ground was once a graveyard. The dead giveaway really is the row of old gravestones over there. But what we can't see any trace of is the church that once stood here. There are suspicious lumps and bumps, and our geophysics, which we've done over this entire area, has shown us what looks like the remains of a small rectangular building under the ground. It looks as though every effort was made to entirely demolish and remove all traces of that church, even to the point of building this later family crypt over part of it.
But we do think it was an ancient building that was here, possibly going back as far as the 1100s and the time of the Normans. And the trenches that were opening up should reveal the various phases of building and redevelopment that took place here from its earliest origins right up until it was demolished in the 1860s.
As usual, the initial clean-up of the trenches revealed the most modern finds first.
Get that.
Anyone for the seat? We left the others to find the rest of the pot, whilst we went off to snoop around the village. Just 2 minutes away is New St. Peter's. This is the church that replaced the one we were currently looking for.
This is a statue of Captain Henry Kingsmill, who was killed fighting in the battle on the Royalist side. And something like this really brings it home to you that wars aren't abstract, that they happen to real people. And the fact is that this statue was commissioned by his mother nearly 30 years after he was killed, and she missed him. And she missed him badly enough that all that time later she wanted to mark the spot where he died.
But the really important thing about the statue for us is that it ties in with our work at Old Radway Church. Originally the statue stood outside the old church, but when that church was demolished it was brought over here and put in the new church. Unfortunately it's not in one piece. His hat's missing, his left hand's missing, both legs are missing. Now, it would be fantastic if when we're excavating our trenches over at the old church, if we came across some of these stone body parts.
And as well as being eternal optimists, we have to be tenacious in the search for clues, and we have to bear in mind that some of the clues are found above the ground. These illustrations are two glimpses of the later years of Old Radway Church that we're looking for over the way. The first one shows a simple stone building. It's dated 1821. This drawing's dated 1845, and it shows something altogether different. It's larger, it's more complicated, it's even got a tower on it. And the mystery is why, less than 20 years after this drawing was made, they demolished the whole thing completely.
Now, when we're excavating our trenches over there, what we hope to do is not just tie the remains of the old church into the battle, but howfully check on the accuracy of these drawings against the remains that we're finding in the ground. Hello, gang. How's it going?
It's going well, actually. Seems to be this kind of rubbly, linear wall anomaly. Early days, so I don't want to commit myself, but it's looking like...
That's your problem, Paul. You never want to commit yourself. You'll end up middle-aged and lonely. But that's a wall, isn't it?
Back wall of the church. A lot more cleaning to do, though.
We were convinced we'd found the remains of old St. Peter's, but how would the archaeology match up to the two drawings? As our work progressed, we'd started to discover a number of finds, from floor tiles to original medieval plastered walls. We'd also started to come across a range of pottery.
Just this little bit here.
Helen had found a shard of decorated late medieval pot. I was on the trail of something I thought was closer to the time of the battle. It's early. Sort of 16th, 17th century, I don't know.
Our finds were starting to bring the church's history back to life, from its early beginnings right up to the time of King Charles I. It'd been over 150 years since there'd been any real fighting in the country, and now they were contemplating a civil war, which is by far and away the nastiest kind of conflict that a population can bring down upon itself. And the country, the counties, the towns, the villages were all being torn apart, right down to individual families as people worked out what side they were going to be on. But for King Charles I, there was no such doubt. He was the king, and as he saw it and understood it, he had the divine right to rule. Charles's campaign gets underway when he raises his standard at Nottingham, and he marches out of that city in September 1642 at the head of a royal army, making for London and the capital and his throne. The Parliamentarian army start off from Northampton, heading east. They're under the command of the Earl of Essex, and his plan is to intercept Charles. Somehow or other, these two huge armies managed to trot right past one another. You'd think that they would have the reconnaissance and the intelligence to be able to keep track of one another, but they don't. And the Parliamentarian army is as far away as Worcester before it realises that Charles is away behind them on the road back to London. And they have to turn around and try to catch up. And things finally come to a conclusion in what is like an episode of the Keystone Cops. The Parliamentarian quartermasters are in the village of Wormleighton, about 6 miles from here, and they're looking for billets and supplies for their men, and lo and behold, the Royalist quartermasters come trotting into town to do the same thing, and that's when they come face to face with one another. And it's only at that point the two armies realise how close together they actually are. So when Charles hears that his enemy is just a few miles away, he's got a tactical dilemma. More by luck than good judgment, he's got himself and his army between the parliamentarian force and London, and the road to the capital is open. So should he carry on, or should he turn now and deal with Essex? Charles knows that if he makes for London now, he might put himself between a rock and a hard place. He could be approaching a hostile capital while the parliamentarian army is coming in and breathing down his neck. And it's at this point that his 23-year-old nephew, Prince Rupert, speaks up with what is to be a decisive voice. Prince Rupert is charismatic. He's a classic Cavalier figure. He's tall, dark and handsome, he's a natty dresser, he's full of fight and talk. And he counsels the king to fight. And he puts spirit into the king's army so that all men are resolved. Charles takes Prince Rupert's advice and decides to bring things to battle. From his position on the top of Edgehill, King Charles would have been able to survey the parliamentarian army on the plain down below. In between the two adversaries stood the church of Old St Peter's, which Tony and the team were now battling to uncover.
We've got this great big wall running through the trench. It's about 1 metre wide, and it's got nice dressed stones on both sides. That's the outside of the building, and this is the inside, and it's got the rubble core. And that's one of the side walls of the church. And it's running up here, and there appears to be a corner here with that same solid stone wall running along toward Paul down there. And along the inside face of this wall, we've actually got plaster on the stones, which is really quite exciting, because it was quite normal for medieval churches to be plastered inside, and sometimes even had paintings on them, religious paintings. So it looks as though we've got the medieval core of the building at least surviving at foundation level. Now, over at the other end, Ian's been looking for the west end of the building, but we've made quite a gruesome find that has made us change tack somewhat, which Ian came up with this morning. And what you're actually seeing here is part of the skull of a human burial. What's the story with this, Ian?
Well, one of the unfortunate things about digging in a graveyard is that not everybody you meet is still alive. And that's what we've got here. We've got a grave cut, which is quite clear, running along here, straight as a die. But that's not the occupant of that grave.
It's too high.
Yeah, he's too high up. So basically what we think is that that guy is from an earlier grave, which was disturbed when they put this grave in.
So the grave diggers have disturbed an earlier...
Yeah, and then they've just put the poor fella back in with the backfill.
The possibility that our skull could be that of a soldier was a very real one. After the battle, many of the dead were buried in the surrounding churches. We were torn. On the one hand, we'd love to investigate further, but on the other, we'd been asked by the church authorities to respect any human remains we found. So Ian was going to have to leave the burial undisturbed and work around it.
I'd arranged to meet Nora Carlin, a Civil War expert, to find out about the role religion played in causing the conflict and how churches, like ours at Old St Peter's, functioned 350 years ago. How big a part would religion have played in 17th century Radway?
Religion we think of as a private commitment to faith and worship, but it was very much a public thing in those days. So religious people thought of religion as something for their whole community, and that meant that they wouldn't just be religious themselves, they would discipline people around them to attend church, to toe the line in terms of sexual morality and so on.
What changes did Charles I try to introduce to the church that were making people so irate?
Well, Charles and his Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud, were very keen to bring back a lot of traditional ceremonies and ornamentation to the church, which had mostly gone since the Reformation 100 years before. A lot of things like the altar rails had been removed. To Charles and his supporters, the altar was a sacred object. It had to be separated off from the common people. The priest who had access to it had special sacred powers. But to their opponents, this is a superstitious attitude.
What did Charles stand to gain if he could push the changes through?
To his mind, mainstream Protestantism was far too egalitarian, maybe even democratic in his view. It put the lay people on too much of a level with the clergy, and it didn't show a proper respect for authority. But the opposition towards him was very strong, and it was led by Puritans.
Who were the Puritans?
Well, the term Puritan, to begin with, was a term of abuse, accusing people of being extreme. I don't think extremism is a very good word, though. I think these were just complete Protestants. They believed that there had been a real change at the Reformation, and that needed to be stood up for, and they didn't like what they saw as Charles and Laud trying to put the clock back. Puritans were also people who thought that there was an international Catholic conspiracy to bring back the rule of Rome, the rule of the Pope, to Britain. And of course this wasn't true. Charles and Laud were not Roman Catholics, but people believed it and they feared it, like people fear international terrorism today.
The altar rail that Charles was so keen to reinstate would have been positioned in the east end of the church, where Tony was currently making headway back at Old St Peter's. Found any of Kingsmill's marble bits yet?
We found one of his feet over there, but it hopped away behind that tree somewhere.
Bugger.
Duffy was a bit slow in the uptake and lost it.
Looks smashing though.
Well, look, this is good. We've got the edge there, the corner there, and then there's another one here. So the interior just runs from that red stone there to here. So pretty narrow, really.
Kingsmill's foot might have done a runner, but we were determined not to let the mystery of the two conflicting church drawings escape us.
We're still chasing the walls because what we need is the outline of the building, and only when we've got that can we start to look at the drawings of the churches that appeared in the 19th century and see which form we've got in the ground. But to do that we've got to remove all this soil, which is hard work at the moment. Archaeology is a bit like a giant jigsaw puzzle, with lots of the pieces missing and no glossy picture on the box to help you. Our problem was we'd got two pictures. These aren't going to help you, mate. Unfortunately, neither seemed to be making much sense.
The later drawing of Old St Peter's, dated 1845, just wasn't tallying up with what we were finding in the trenches. And the earlier drawing wasn't much help either. I was excavating on the outer wall of the church, and according to the drawing, I should have uncovered a porch. However, I'd come across something entirely different. Well, these big stones here are forming a buttress, which is helping to support the building at the corner, stopping the big thick walls slumping out the way. And down at my feet here is the lowest course of the wall itself, and the layers of stone above it are stepped back so that the bottom layer forms a very firm foundation, and the whole thing just adds together to keep the whole thing knitted together and strong. Nothing was where it should have been. As our work drew to a close, the archaeological evidence from our two trenches and the geophysics was stacking up. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together. However, the picture they painted didn't match either of the two drawings.
We came to Radway to find Old St Peter's Church, and we stumbled across a mystery, but our archaeological investigation has helped us to solve that. We've got two drawings of the church. The earliest probably gives the best idea of what the church looked like, but it's still highly inaccurate because it shows a great big porch coming out here on this corner of the building, which our archaeology has clearly shown never existed. The second drawing shows a church that never existed, and we think it's an architect's proposal for what could happen to the church if he did work on it. But we'd proved that it was never built. The remains we'd uncovered were that of a far simpler church. This is the building that would have been around at the time of the battle. Eventually, in 1860, it was demolished. The village wanted a larger church, so they moved to another site and built a brand new one from scratch.
Our old friend Captain Kingsmill and the Royalist Army would have passed by Old St Peter's on their way to battle. Tomorrow morning we'd be following in their footsteps and leading our archaeological troops onto the battlefield.
After joining us for breakfast.
I think Rev joining us for everything.
On a cold, crisp morning in October 1642, the final preparations were made for the first battle of the English Civil War. Both armies were largely made up of raw recruits and untested officers. As these soldiers saddled their horses, checked their muskets and manoeuvred the cannons, an all-pervading nervous tension must have swept through the ranks. They knew they were about to find out about the bloody realities of war. At around midday, the cards were dealt and the Royalist army stepped down off Edgehill. It now came down to hot lead and cold steel. The priming pan on the first parliamentarian cannon was lit, the nerves of the raw soldiers were jangled, and the bloodshed began. For the next hour or so, the two armies traded cannon shot. Then Prince Rupert, at the command of the Royalist cavalry, played his hand. First the right wing set off, then the left. From a trot to a canter, they bore down on their adversaries, gathering speed all the time, until, swords outstretched, hooves thundering, they hit the enemy at full gallop. The parliamentarian cavalry were smashed to pieces and swept off the battlefield. Things were now looking grim for the Earl of Essex and the parliamentarian army.
It was over these fields that the Royalist cavalry charged nearly 350 years ago. But just what made a ton of horse flesh such a powerful weapon? Andy Robert Shaw from the National Army Museum had agreed to saddle up a couple of chargers and school us in the art of a Civil War cavalryman.
Put us in the middle of there. So whereabouts on the battlefield are we?
The Royalists came off the ridge,
Yeah.
Edgehill, which at the time wasn't covered with trees, it was just a bare slope.
It's very, very steep when you're actually up there.
It's incredible. Came down here through the riding school, and they lined up just in front of us, not far away from us at all.
Yeah.
And the parliamentarians are some distance away, but very visible on the other side of the trees. But the parliamentarians very cleverly put themselves, the infantry line, behind a ploughed field.
Right.
So that the Royalist artillery wouldn't bounce, the cannonballs wouldn't bounce and then go into the men, they would just hit the soft earth and
And then they
sink.
would just roll, it wouldn't do so much damage.
Grief, it's chamois leather and a half. You look like a bellboy.
All right.
Where's your wee hat?
It's your breastplate. And that goes in like that. The war's only declared exactly 2 months before the battle occurs. And everybody involved, virtually everyone, was a civilian when it starts. Right. And they're all from the same sort of background. So when you look at a soldier, there's nothing that tells me, looking at you in the 17th century, that you are a parliamentarian.
I used to sell double glazing. Look at me now.
Well, it's very similar, because everyone's coming in from these civilian jobs and they're suddenly becoming soldiers, and there's nothing about the way that you're dressed that says to me that you're definitely a parliamentarian or that you're a royalist.
But he's got the long floppy hair and I've got the short.
But gentlemen did have long hair on both sides in the same way as working men probably had short hair. That's what it's about.
Common little man.
But what we'll do now is have a think about how we might actually tell you apart then. And the answer's here. Sashes. Orange and red. The Royalists wearing a red sash, that's either going to be worn over your shoulder or around your waist.
That's beautiful, Neil.
I'm in a nice middle-of-the-road burgundy colour.
You just look like a beauty queen.
But the fact is that now we can tell you apart, we can actually think about how you might fight. The sword you've got there is a rapier, and it's designed really to be a stabbing weapon. It's the ultimate stabbing weapon. And if you look at it, you've got this very odd bit of hilt in front of where your grip is. The reason for that is that you're going to put your finger along the blade, and the intent is really to stab your opponent. And if you imagine you're trying to kill somebody, what you're doing is taking that hand and you're pushing it, you're stabbing either his body or his face. But the important thing is it's actually easier on a horse to cut than it is to stab forward. Yeah. And certainly the whole style at this period is to use a sword like this, which is heavier, with a broader blade, generally, sharp front and back, hence sometimes called a back sword, with a variety of different sorts of hilts to give you maximum protection. And you are simply going to cut down on your opponents. Hence, all the blows are designed to be deflected by the different parts of the helmet. This thing is a crumple zone, that strengthens it. You've got earpieces, the bars at the front mean that you can't get through it. No. No. No need for that. Yeah, come on. Let's go. Nothing to be worried about.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Right. You're next.
I come and get Major.
All yours, son.
Get him. Yeah.
You ready?
It's not easy moving in this stuff.
Yeah, no, it isn't. Okay.
How's it feel?
Fine at the moment. It's not moving yet, though, you'll notice, Andrew.
Well, that's the next step, isn't it?
Come on.
Let's see if you can move him around a bit.
Come on, Major.
That's it.
Whoa, steady.
You right?
This helmet's not easy. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa, Major. Whoa.
Whoa.
Whoa. Whoa, whoa.
Come on.
It's good. Should we just try swords now?
Okay.
Swords.
Yeah? Same thing again.
Whoa.
He's shy of this.
He doesn't like that.
Let's see.
Come on.
Major, there. That's all it is. Okay?
That's good.
All right. And drop it if you're into problems.
That's good.
That's good.
Whoa. Whoa.
Nice. She'll obviously be in a body of at least 60 horses, 3 ranks deep.
Come on.
Good round trot, it says in the manuals. Oh, it's good. Very good. But you can imagine, can't you, cavalry riding down towards you?
Yeah.
You would probably
It
lose
must
it.
make a heck of a din, because all I
Yeah.
can hear is rattling of metal
Yeah.
in my helmet.
Yeah, and you'd have neighs and gunshots and all of that noise, and you really would hear it miles away, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Has to be said, it does give you an enormous sense of power, rather than being a foot soldier.
Absolutely. Yes, I feel very inferior down here.
Yeah. You feel a bit more of a target, I suppose, but there's a sense of, you know, command.
Yeah, but on your way in, I suppose, you've got the horse's head as well between you and your opponent. You're not much of a target, really. The other thing to notice, by the way, that now you're on horses, can you see further?
Can indeed.
One of the things that they're talking about at the moment is the fact that generals on battlefields always have that advantage because they're on horses at this period. You can always see a bit further than the man on foot.
The prospect of Prince Rupert's royalist cavalry thundering towards us, swinging their broadswords, would certainly have made us turn tail and flee. High on their success and with little regard for the battle behind them, Rupert's cavalry drove on towards the village of Kyneton. This is where the parliamentarian baggage train, containing all their munitions and personal possessions, was stationed. It was a great prize, but to win it, the marauding cavaliers first had to overcome the parliamentarian soldiers defending the track and river crossing that led into the village.
The track and the ford where this bitter fight took place have long since disappeared. Hot on their hooves, we were determined to find them. Our painstaking research had led us to a back garden in Kyneton. We believed that the route the royalist cavalry would have galloped down led through Mr. Chandler's garden, past his dahlias, across his lawn, and smack bang into the parliamentarian guards. Now all we had to do was prove it. We began by putting an excavation trench across what we expected to be the track leading down to the ford. We were looking for some sort of defined road surface, either a formal one like cobbling, or even something as simple as just compacted earth. Mr. Chandler and his son turned up to see what the digger had done to their back garden.
Good morning. Well, we're starting to get bits of what look suspicious like
That's bone.
medieval, early medieval pottery and bits of bone and stuff as well.
The quantity of bone and pottery fragments we were finding told us there had been human activity in this area. Unfortunately, it predated the Civil War. So far, no sign of the Battle of the Baggage Train.
Leaving the team to persevere, I went off to Edgehill to meet Peter Edwards, an expert in 17th century military logistics. When I think of the baggage train, I get this image in my head of the little trucks at Glasgow Airport with all the piles of suitcases on the back. But what does a baggage train look like in this case?
Well, it's lots and lots of carts, pulled by horses if possible, but oxen will do. Horses are always preferred because horses are stronger.
Really?
Yeah, oh yes, horses are certainly on light soils. They're much stronger, and they're much more sure-footed as well.
What size was the baggage train for an army?
Take Essex army, it's something like 30 pieces of ordnance. You would need well over 1,000 horses. You'd have a couple of hundred wagons, and so it's a fairly big part of the army. It's also very slow-moving.
Does the artillery move together with the soldiers' kit?
The soldiers would carry some of their own kit. They had what was known as a knapsack as we would know it, and in it they would carry some cheese and some bread, a pound to a pound and a half of bread and half a pound, 3/4 pound of cheese for a daily ration. Pikemen had the worst problem at Edgehill. They carried a 16-foot pike with a metal end. Many of them, in fact, cut off a couple of feet to make it easier. And of course you hope that the other side did the same, because when it came to push of pike, you may be at a disadvantage if you had a shorter pike. And we know in Ireland, in one battle, Benburb, that the side that won had the longest pikes. Size did matter.
Is the baggage train guarded, defended?
Certainly. Your baggage wins you the war or loses you the war. If you can't get any ordnance, if you haven't got any match, any shot, any gunpowder, well, you can't continue. And so you have a detachment of musketeers to guard the baggage train. They have firelocks. Most musketeers at Edgehill had matchlocks, which is fired by lighted taper. But you don't want a lighted taper around the baggage train with gunpowder. But there are cases of soldiers actually blowing themselves up because they'd have a ladle in one hand to ladle out some of the gunpowder and a lighted match in the other hand to set fire to the cannon. And, you know, in the heat of battle, got it the wrong way round, boom.
When I returned to the Chandler's back garden, where we were looking for the Battle of the Baggage Train, I could tell from the look on Tony's face that he was pleased.
Right.
Hey up, mucker.
Why?
As you can see, we're hard at it. Still loads of what looks like medieval pottery coming out. But that is just rubbish compared to this.
Wow.
It's not a fishing weight.
God, that's brilliant.
Pistol ball. It just caught my eye as I was shoveling out.
Brilliant.
But pistol ball, cavalry, Ford, track.
Very good.
All fits together.
Yeah. We still hadn't found a road surface, but we'd got our first clue. The cavalry were the only soldiers to use pistols, so Tony's find was very significant.
We'd found the ammunition, now we wanted to get our hands on the guns. Very kindly, the local Ministry of Defence base had agreed to let Martin Pegler of the Royal Armouries and us use their firing range. Martin, packing a pair of Civil War pistols, had agreed to make our day.
This is what we're going to be shooting this afternoon. That's a wheel lock. That's a flint lock. The mechanism for the wheel lock is slightly more complex than it is for the flint lock. What happens is you lower the dog head, or the cock, down onto the wheel, and the iron pyrites rests on it, and it's just like a cigarette lighter. The wheel rotates, it strikes sparks, and the priming powder goes. The beauty of them is that they're very, very smooth to shoot. There's virtually no reciprocating parts causing any sort of wobble or imbalance. And in fact, wheel locks were used for target shooting in Europe until well into the 18th century. The flintlock is a slightly different kettle of fish. It's simpler, it's more robust. You've got a half cock, which is a safety, and a full cock mechanism. Loading it is exactly the same. You put powder and ball down, but you have a pan, you put powder in the pan, you close the pan cover. When you pull it onto full cock, you simply need to squeeze the trigger. Once you squeeze the trigger, it will fly forward and strike. It'll blow the pan cover open, drop sparks into the pan, and it'll ignite. It sounds complicated, but actually it's quite quick. We'll load the wheel lock first and fire it. Important thing is that you have to ram the bullet firmly down on the charge. The last thing you want is an air gap, because that would lead to a breech explosion, which is not recommended pastime. No. So if you'd like to take that, keep it pointing down range.
Okay.
We take these two.
And don't forget, we're going to need hearing and eye protection in both these cases.
Okay.
We span the lock, which is just another term for cocking it.
What did he say?
I said it's 2:30.
Great.
Right. Having spanned the lock, if you'd like to give me the priming powder, put a good dose of priming powder into it. Take that back. Close the pan. That's ready to go.
Okay.
So far in your own time. You fired quite high.
Over his head.
That's probably down to nothing more than sheer naked fear.
Blind terror.
That was fantastic,
That
man.
was good.
At close range, quite effective. Flintlock.
Please. Oh, lordy. Here we go. Stand back, everyone.
High again.
It was good, though.
Can I have another shot of mine, please?
It becomes addictive, doesn't it?
It does.
Damn. One of the problems with wheel locks is that they have a tendency to misfire. Oh. Please, God, let it go.
There was actually nobody killed at this battle.
You can at least see why the flintlock began to take over from the wheel lock
indeed.
as the battlefield pistol.
Best the British time.
Cheers.
Wow.
Well done.
Did that hit?
Yeah.
It went in below the right pinky.
It did indeed.
Oof. That's great, that is. Look at the size of that hole.
I know.
So how does that compare to a modern gun?
My service pistol will fire a lot faster, have a greater penetration, greater accuracy, and is all round a much more usable tool. But we would only use it to protect ourselves normally in the normal environment, a pistol, whereas of course your cavalryman here is using it as his primary weapon
Right.
prior to going to the sword.
Can we see one used?
You can indeed.
Fantastic.
Ready? Adopt the standing alert position. 10 rounds grouping, in your own time, go on. Stop, unload.
Wow.
And there's your comparison.
That's quite a difference.
So if you had one of them, you could probably win the battle of Edgehill single-handedly.
All on your own. Once we got back to Kyneton, a small invasion of Mr. Chandler's neighbours arrived to see us start the metal detector survey.
Okay for some digging?
Yeah.
Things got off to a bad start. All our initial finds were modern. But then...
Aha!
Musket ball.
Ooh, that's nice.
It's nice now, it wasn't then if it was coming out yet.
Yeah? Can you dig up another one?
We'll certainly try.
Tony, musket ball.
Oh yeah, still got the screw on it. Brilliant. Oh. Oh wow. Oh, it's exciting. It is exciting.
There's one there and there's one over there.
Good Lord, these are just freshly made. These have probably just been made here.
Tony! Tony, remember that bit of lead we found, the cylinder?
Another one here.
But it's got marks on it.
Okay.
Look.
Does it? Has it got... The heck is that?
Somebody's been scratching something at the end of it.
But I'm pretty sure it's case.
And there's another musket ball over there.
Cheerio. Bye.
Bye.
The neighbours retreated, marvelling at what had been uncovered. They'd never be able to look over the fence at the Chandler's back garden in the same way again. The Chandler's lawn would now be drawn, documented, and in a small way immortalised in our scientific report on the Battle of Edgehill. Even though we didn't find any evidence for a formal track or a road, our metal detector survey here did throw up some startling results. We found a lot of carbine and pistol balls here, and through them we can confidently say that cavalry were here, because cavalry are the boys that use those weapons. We also found the paraphernalia of a campsite, but the really interesting thing is that those pistol and carbine balls which were made here were never fired, they were just dropped. So what we're looking at here is a campsite that was overrun as the Royalist cavalry advanced.
Once through the defensive encampment we'd discovered, the Royalist cavalry successfully sacked the parliamentarian baggage train. But crucially, what they failed to do was regroup and return to help the rest of their army back on the battlefield. Had they done so, they could have delivered a decisive blow for King Charles. On the field, the battle intensified. The opposing infantry were now the main players. Muskets firing and pikes clashing, the two armies clattered together in the deadly scrum known as the Push of Pikes. With all the Royalist cavalry flown, the parliamentarian commander, the Earl of Essex, now had an ace up his sleeve. Unlike Charles, his reserve horse were still on the field. It was now or never for the Royalist infantry as they fought for their king.
Cheers, mate.
See you tomorrow.
See you later.
Tomorrow we were going to regroup our troops and begin the hunt for King's Leys barn. I don't understand how anybody ever got hurt doing push-a-pike.
In what way?
Well, I mean, you and all your mates have got a 16-foot long stick with a point on the end, and so you go clacking across the grass and you meet another bunch of guys that have all got a 16-foot long stick. So then what? You know, everybody just...
I think the basic
have somebody's eye out.
that you're forgetting, Neil, is that they're there to fight a battle. So they're not just going like that, they're going like that. There are stories from Edgehill of guys with upwards of 23 wounds. So they're getting 16 foot of wood.
Somebody picking on somebody.
Poked into them.
Somebody must have found an opening.
Like a voodoo doll.
Got him again.
So you could be upright, punctured to...
Buggery.
Exactly. And not being able to move. But the amazing thing is at Edgehill, because it was fought in October, so it was cold. After they left the injured and the dead on the battlefield at night, the temperature dropped. And those that had been badly injured but weren't dead didn't bleed to death, because basically they had ice cubes in their veins.
Oh, right.
Imagine it. Imagine how bad that would be. And then you wake up and you go, oh God, it's only 1642. Haven't got proper medicine yet. The farmstead, known as King's Leys Barn, is inextricably linked with the Battle of Edgehill. It's said to have played host to Charles's two sons, who watched the battle from its walls, before they had to flee when the fighting threatened to overrun them. We tracked down the farm's remains. Unfortunately, nothing's ever simple in this game. They were under a giant pile of rubble. And our troubles didn't stop there. We thought we could see evidence of badgers. They're a protected species, so their presence could stop us working. We called in Peter Randerson, a local badger expert, and waited nervously.
It seems you've got a outlying badger set, which is like an auxiliary set. Not the actual main, but it does seem active. You've probably got 3, probably 4 badgers living in there.
Really?
Yeah, possibly some young at this time of year.
Ah. So what do you reckon? Peter told us that there was no way we could remove any of the rubble mound, but he said we'd be able to excavate around the edges. If we bring a machine in, is that going to disturb?
No, I think you'll be fine down here. I'll work in short bursts, not too long with the machine.
Right.
Just remember they're on the night shift and they need a little bit of rest as well.
Our 4-ton mechanical digger tiptoed past the sleeping badgers, ready to start work. Ah!
Oh, look at that.
That's beautiful.
Bingo, I think.
Got a winner. That's obviously it. That's great.
It was from a position close to the building we'd just started to uncover that the Royalist infantry first set off, marching towards the terrifying push of pikes, a determined enemy and their implacable commander. On the 12th of July 1642, the Earl of Essex was put in command of the Parliamentarian army. As far as the leaders of the House were concerned, his job was to defend England's liberties against the forces of popery and despotism. And halfway through the Battle of Edgehill, Essex would find himself in the sharp end of that fight. He was born Robert Devereux in 1591. At the age of 10, he lost his father, the second Earl of Essex, to the executioner. While the old man was handsome and opinionated, the son was a quieter, different character. He was stout-hearted, he was honest, and he was reserved. But what he did have in common with his old man was opposition to the monarchy. His father had been executed by Elizabeth I for his part in a failed coup d'etat. And now, at the age of 51, Essex himself was putting his own neck on the line by standing up against the king. That didn't stop Charles trying to curry favour with the Earl, however. He made him a Privy Councillor, he appointed him as Lord Chamberlain. It looks as though he was trying to use Essex's ambition and maybe just the attraction of cash money to win him over to his side. And an observer at the time noted, if he succeeds in winning over the Earl, he will have achieved a great gain, since this nobleman possesses the strongest support in Parliament. But Essex couldn't be bought, and so the value of his stock rose as Parliament realised that here truly was a man they could trust. Crucially, he was also a man with military experience. He'd fought in Germany, he'd fought in Holland. He was popular with the men in his command, and he had demonstrated his ability. So when Parliament raised an army, he was a natural choice for its leader. After that first terrifying royalist cavalry charge, when his left and right flank had been driven away, it was reported that Essex was to be seen right in the thick of the fearsome push of pike in hand, leading his men like a soldier should. And then when the two forces drew apart to literally draw breath and work out what to do next, Essex made his move. He launched his infantry back into a second assault and delivered the masterstroke. He sent 2 reserve bodies of cavalry out into the attack. So now these royalist soldiers, who are already battered and bloodied from fighting at the front, have the fear of God put up them. And it works. In little pockets, royalist soldiers begin to flee. So Essex has done it. He has turned the tables. And it's his adversary, Charles, who seems to be on shaky ground. It was to the heart of where this pulsating struggle took place that we were now headed. Today, much of it's covered by the Ministry of Defence base. On the day of the battle, there was something like 30,000 armed men and horses clattering about this area. And it's with the metal detectors that we'll try and pin down where some of the activity was going on. Now, foot soldiers, by and large, are carrying muskets. And men on horseback, the cavalry, are generally firing pistols and carbines. Now, those weapons are all firing different sizes of balls. So depending on what you find and where, you can start to pin down where it was cavalry action, where it was infantry action, where it was a combination of both.
The other really exciting thing about this field is that it's said that Captain Kingsmill from Old Radway Church, where his statue is, was actually killed here. And it gives you a real buzz to have all those threads and all those stories coming together, and to think that you're actually metal detecting very close by to where somebody you know by name was actually killed.
The MOD have a very strict policy of no metal detecting on their land.
I like the look of that already. Musket ball.
Musket ball, Tony. They also have armed guards and attack dogs to enforce their rules. Fortunately for us, they were convinced of the scientific value of the research proposal we'd presented to them, and they gave us special permission to carry out work here.
That's your standard issue, isn't it?
Yeah. Just oh, little dancer. Look at that.
We just hoped the men with guns and the Alsatians had been told about us.
Oh, that's nice. It's still got the casting seam on it. That's quite a small one. Maybe a carbine ball or something.
What you got? Potential squashed musket ball?
Huzzah! We've got 3.
Got 1.
Start. Pristine one. Case shot. It's impacted again, isn't it? Oh, I don't know which way to turn.
I know. I think it is, anyway.
Oh, it's fallen short, or whatever.
Musket ball.
Not hit much.
Brilliant.
I'm getting a wee chimney because it's deep, or... Turned out nice again.
The metal detector survey at the MOD base had come up trumps. The distribution pattern of the finds we'd made was fascinating. We had 2 concentrations of musket balls, 30 metres apart. This represents a point in the battle where 2 sets of opposing musketeers blasted away at each other nearly 3.5 centuries ago. Before Andy left, we got him to have a quick look at some of the finds we'd made.
Got so much shot, I mean, over where the MOD base is now, and it's all from various stages of the fighting. Balls that have been dropped without being fired, things that look as if they've been fired but they haven't hit anything, and then there's also musket balls which most emphatically have hit something.
Definitely, there's enough mass there to be a bullet, but that's not bullet shaped anymore, is it?
No, indeed not.
No.
And also, well, canister.
Yes, I think so. That's just lumps of lead just chopped up with a pair of shears and put it in a tin container or a wooden container and put it down the gun barrel.
And we've been looking at the parliamentarian cavalry route and the baggage train toward Kyneton, and I thought at first that was a pistol ball, but it blatantly isn't.
No, it looks like it, doesn't it, from that angle?
Yeah.
But it obviously is. It's a button that's missing the shank that would be here, a sort of oval shank that would hold it onto the clothing. But that's identical to the one that was on that buff coat. There was like a row of them, wasn't there, along the cuff?
Yeah. Oh, the things that were hanging down from the
on the sleeves, exactly the same as that. The same size, same shape, everything. Could almost be a casting from that. Incredible. But that would make sense. They're the sort of things that will break off.
Yeah.
You know, any physical activity, they tend to go.
Also, like this.
Oh yes, that's a chunk of a skillet, isn't it? A cooking pan.
Frying pan.
Yeah, I got like a big frying pan with a bell in it, with 3 little legs in it, so you can sit it in a fire, and then with a handle you can cook a meal in it, you know, without burning your hands.
So, from the small size of that, we could say that soldiers are cooking individually or in small groups as opposed to huge cauldrons with bubbling communal stews and soup.
No, that doesn't happen. You cook for yourself, or perhaps the men in your file, perhaps 6 of you together, but not you know, communal cooking in the way that they do in modern armies.
This one actually came from Dean River, and that's a bit of an oddity.
Yeah.
I thought it was just canister or case at first, but it's got score marks on the top of it.
I wonder whether that's been made possibly as case and then turned into a gaming piece. Just by putting the marks on it to show it's different from the plain ones.
Right.
And you could have that used in a game like Nine Man's Morris, or even, I suppose, in checkers or drafts. When one man's cooking, the other guy's perhaps, you know, gambling, you know, while the food gets ready.
But that's a nice little snapshot of camp life, isn't it? It was no picnic on the battlefield. Bloodied and bruised, fatigue had swept over both sides, yet it was Parliament that now had the upper hand. With some of King Charles' regiments fleeing, his artillery played a heroic part. Firing 19 to the dozen, they kept the Roundheads at bay, allowing the bulk of the Royalist infantry to withdraw in an orderly fashion and establish a new defensive position. The Earl of Essex was unable to press home his advantage, his cavalry and infantry were thoroughly exhausted. This momentous first battle of the English Civil War had limped towards a draw.
Your leg's stiff with riding.
My posterior will never be the same again.
You're bruised.
We hobbled back to Kingsley's barn, the site where the Royalist army had held firm at the end of the battle and saved the king. Bolstering our archaeological force, we pressed on to finish the work.
In the biggest trench, we'd uncovered a large mortared wall that had been plastered on the inside, making it part of a house rather than a barn. This contrasted with the much rougher wall Ian had found in the trench behind us.
Essentially, it's just stuck together with mud. The other thing about it, it also just stops here. That's the end of it. So at the moment, we think what we've got is a three-sided barn, with this as the open side. And it would be maybe something for blacksmithing, somewhere to put the animals, something like that.
All that was left to do was finish up and record our results.
We've got the remains of 2 buildings here, and even though our friends the badgers are living on top of them, we've been able to excavate enough to tell us that they were very well built and substantial buildings. And at the time of the battle, this site would have marked a very obvious point on the landscape. And it's no wonder that the Royal Army, as it came off Edgehill over there, recognised this site as a place of strategic importance. And that's why the King's army was lined up along here.
And the buildings would have been very attractive to an army because they can make use of them. They can have a dressing station for the treating of injured men, they can store ammunition and supplies, they can use the place as a forward command post. And we've got evidence of infantry and cavalry being here. And perhaps most important of all, it's an ideal spot to tell men to fall back to if they have to. It's a very easy set of directions to say, make for the buildings. And in fact, that's what the Royal Army do. And so in a very real way, Kingsley's barn marks the beginning and the end of the Royalist story at the Battle of Edgehill. Our work finished, we couldn't help reflecting that while the battle had ended in a draw, 2,000 or more soldiers had lost their lives here.
Don't get me.
Thank you.
The carnage and slaughter at the Battle of Edgehill had genuinely shocked those involved, but it was only the beginning. For King Charles I, Parliament and the people of Britain, years of bloody conflict lay ahead. You know what would be really useful in our line of work? Would be a highly trained badger.
Now there's a thought.
You could have a highly trained badger with a little camera on its head.
And a little helmet.
On a little miner's helmet with a light. And then you could just unleash it into sites in lieu of geophysics as a sort of subsurface exploration.
Yeah.
Pretty hard to come by, you highly trained badger, though.